Good evening. Global investors are sitting like hawks on telephone wires, watching the latest drama in Athens as the Prime Minister Antonis Samaras begs his European colleagues, Mrs Merkel pre-eminent among them, for more time to deal with Greece's debt problems. Since July, many big stock markets have risen on the expectation that in the end, the European Central Bank would intervene to address the crisis. But with investors still waiting for news that the ECB is stepping in to facilitate the purchase of debt from Italy and Spain to ease the crisis, the markets are jittery all over again. Here's Joe Lynham.
As our mini heatwave comes to an end, continental Europe has been suffering under dangerously high temperatures for the past few weeks. And the Eurozone crisis, which is now over 1,000 days old, is heating up once again. And shock horror, Greece is back in the frying pan. It wants a 2-year extension on its latest €130 billion bailout loan from the so-called Troika, which was only agreed last March. Today, the new Greek Prime Minister Antonis Samaras hosted the Eurogroup President Jean-Claude Juncker, who, alongside the rest of the Troika, has twice bailed Greece out since 2010. Going into that meeting, the official EU line was, "We have a clear process in place," which is Euro-speak for no changes to the deal tortuously agreed 6 months ago. Today, body language experts were being deployed to see if there were any changes in at least the mood.
We'll have to discuss the lengthening of the period and other dimensions of the problem when we are taking under exam the findings of the Troika.
An economy in prolonged recession with soaring unemployment, particularly among young people, cannot stand on its own feet.
Afterwards, Mr Samaras invited Mr Juncker to further talks in his car. Tomorrow he flies to France before jetting to a nippier Berlin for talks with Angela Merkel, who he'll hope is fully refreshed and upbeat after her holiday in Salzburg. But creditor nations in the north are a lot cooler on the idea of a pause in Greek repayments. German MP Klaus-Peter Wilsch from Angela Merkel's own CDU party hinted today that Germany was already throwing good money after bad by lending money to Greece. What's the point of the German taxpayer getting IOUs if the debtor cannot or will not pay? So why give Greece more time when it has barely started to make the major structural changes it agreed to?
The economy is still in a tailspin. There is a recognition, I think, amongst the Troika that there is a need to provide additional relief for a couple of years so that the new government can meet its fiscal targets. But that, of course, creates additional financing needs, and that's a difficult conversation amongst the creditor countries.
Meanwhile, something big is in the offing in Frankfurt, home to the European Central Bank. It looks set to finally use the biggest monetary weapons in its arsenal through a programme of unlimited bond buying of peripheral debt. That means that the ECB will effectively go to war with the markets and buy up government bonds of weaker Eurozone countries in the hope of ending the volatility which has dogged the zone for almost 3 years. Expect to hear 2 new C words in the coming weeks: conditionality and convertibility. Conditionality is the strings or conditions attached by the ECB on Spain and Italy if it is to buy its bonds on an open-ended basis. The Spanish and Italians may have to bury their pride and formally apply for a bailout from the ESM and EFSF bailout programmes. As for convertibility, that might account for the softening of the German stance of late, because if the very future of the currency is called into doubt, i.e. you cannot convert the currency, then the Germans may allow the ECB to do whatever, and we mean whatever is necessary, to save the single currency. And that talk of major ECB intervention has already stopped the slide in the euro against most major currencies and dramatically lowered Italian and Spanish borrowing costs, down 11% and 17% respectively over the past month. If all markets, politicians, taxpayers and the weather were to line up correctly, could we ever arrive at Utopiaville, where northern fiscal coolness lives comfortably side by side with southern spending heat?
We could see them buy enough time to slowly and incrementally and very deliberately move towards a fiscal and a banking and a political union. But unless we eventually get to either debt mutualization or debt monetization or both, I don't think we'll see an equilibrium in the common currency area.
So for now, the Eurozone remains a hot issue, but whose citizens drift, however knowingly, towards a banking, fiscal and maybe even political union, which few would have forecast even a year ago.
Joe Leinenwell, watching that from a studio in California, is a man who knows a thing or two about the markets. Mohamed El Erian is the CEO of PIMCO, the world's largest bond investor. Good evening to you. Hearing some German politicians particularly saying it wouldn't really matter if Greece left the euro. What's your assessment of that?
I think long-term it actually would be better for the Eurozone if Greece were to exit, simply because Greece has enormous problem generating economic growth and jobs within the Eurozone, and Greece has too much debt. So the solution within the Eurozone is very difficult. The problem is there is no short-term solution. There's no killer app to get Greece out without disrupting the rest of the Eurozone. So no one wants to make the decision, and certainly no one wants to go down in history as having made that decision. So we're most likely going to try to muddle through yet again.
Are you betting on that?
What I'm thinking is going to happen, and I want to make a distinction between what's likely to happen and what should happen. What's likely to happen is some very messy compromise that involves giving some more time to the Greeks, but not very much, and involves the creditor giving some more money, but not very much, and it's going to break apart in a few weeks anyway. That's what's likely to happen. What should happen is people step back, recognize that they've been adopting the wrong approach for the last 3 years, and making the courageous decision. So I think we're going to end up getting to the difficult decisions, but unfortunately, they're going to be forced on Greece rather than taken by Greece.
Now, the expectation is that the ECB is going to come in and hoover up Spanish and Italian bonds, to hoover up their debts. Do you think that's the most likely thing to happen?
So I don't think the ECB will do that for Greece. I think the ECB is going to make a very big distinction between Greece on the one hand and Spain and Italy. And that is a really important distinction that the ECB wants to make and should make, because Spain and Italy are not where Greece is. In terms of what they'll do for Spain and Italy, expectations are very high. People listen very carefully to President Draghi in London on the 26th of July when he said that the ECB is committed to preserving the euro, and critically said, we will do whatever it takes, and believe me, it will work. That's what he said. Markets now want to see words translated into actions. We don't think that that translation is that simple.
And how disappointed would you be if this doesn't happen?
I think that the markets in general will be disappointed. I think all of us should be ready for renewed volatility. We've had a wonderful 4 weeks of tranquility. That tranquility was caused by words, not actions. Now we need actions. And I think that it will be very hard for the ECB to deliver what both Germany wants, which is conditionality, and what Spain and Italy want, which is cash, right? And they're going to have to strike that delicate balance, and it's a very delicate balance to strike.
But if it looks as if the ECB is going to do whatever it takes, then this is going to be an open-ended purchasing of all debt and printing money. What will that eventually do to the global markets?
So if the ECB does that, and I stress if in capital letters because it's still uncertain, first, that would be tremendous support for Italy and Spain. Their spreads would come down. Second, however, it would undermine the long-term credibility of the central banks. Central banks are not supposed to take on all this credit risk. This is for the fiscal agencies. So there's going to be a question about the functioning of institutions. Third, it would impose significant political stress within the Eurozone for the reasons you heard earlier in your report, which is the Germans don't think that that's the right approach to solving the problem. They want more conditionality rather than just cash. So I think it would solve short-term, but it would complicate the Eurozone long-term. You need this mix of three things: mutualization, conditionality, and acceptance by citizens in Europe. And so far it's been very difficult to comprehensively meet these three criteria.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us tonight.